Well, Kurt Johnson here. I might as well just get us started. I guess what attracted me to this breakout group was when it said New Frontiers. And I think many of you know that one of the really exciting new frontiers now is what's called the pro-social movement in mainstream science. And what's interesting about that, David Sloan Wilson, who's probably the most famous evolutionary biologist in the world now and is the father of what's called the cooperative school of evolution, that is really shown by group selection and multi-level selection that evolution drives toward the good. Evolution drives toward altruistic behavior. It drives toward defining survival of the fittest as the best cooperator. That in a conscious society and in a culture, fitness is actually cooperation. It's not competition. Now, that's a revolution in mainstream science. And what's happened, very much kind of like Rory and Adam in their book, The New Monasticism, they actually predicted it. It's actually taken in masses of people who would consider themselves non-religious or even atheist, but because they see that scientific process is moving toward altruism and cooperation, then they're on the same ethical and moral bandwagon as the rest of us. And this has become, a well-supported movement and a really dynamic movement. So I think some of you know that in November, David Sloan Wilson and I were invited by His Holiness the Dalai Lama to come over to Dharamshala, which luckily was before COVID, and really explained to him, we had 3 wonderful days with him, about how with this driving mainstream science, it opens up a whole new realm of the power of what all of us would consider, interspiritual understanding or unity consciousness, to where the world might be able to go in such a positive direction. So that's a wonderful new frontier. They're operating now with a grant from Templeton Foundation to start training people, to start, teaching this. What they're doing actually, and I'll just close with this because there's so many of us, but they're combining the 9 design principles of Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom, which are all about how systems can be self-sustaining without any exploitation, combining those with the 9 points of universal spirituality from Wayne Teasdale and the 9 points of agreement among the world's religions from Father Thomas Keating's work, and making them into one global vision about how goodness and work toward goodness can move forward, whether you have a sacred experience or not. So that's powerful from the secular side of reality now, and it's a new frontier. So I just wanted to say, nice to have a chance to throw that out there.
Is that Annie? Maybe instead of chatting, I would love to hear your voice. I would love to know why you came to this group. Since you wanted to be in the group with Seemi, Ghazi, I'm just wondering, this is how I've done it always. Maybe you can, what were you?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any. I just thought I didn't see you. I didn't think I was in the right group. Oh. I just am so impressed with everything you've said throughout these weeks that I just want to drink it in. There's something about your spirituality that draws me, that speaks to me.
Well, I'm moved and humbled, and I want to thank you. I've been, if any of you saw me very early on when we were doing these prayers, I kept having to wipe tears away. I wasn't expecting that, and I didn't use my waterproof kohol that I reserve for weddings and funerals. Like a Muslim woman without her kohol doesn't really feel quite dressed, but it was running down my face. What I think I was drawn to this because I was raised interspiritually. When I was 3 years old, we moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. My father was doing his PhD at Harvard, and he was doing it, his focus in comparative religion with the great Dr. Wilfred Cantwell Smith. And he was studying Hinduism, although he came from a family of Muslim ulama, let's just say Muslim rabbis, like from the heart of Sunni Islam. And he was studying Sanskrit, and he and when we lived at the center, we were in a community where there were Hindus and Buddhists and Christians and Muslims, and actually many of the great luminaries of religious studies now were there. And we had a common room, and we celebrated all the festivals together, and our courtyards and balconies opened out to one another. And that shaped me from the very beginning. So I think, you know, one of the things that happens is like we get pegged. I get, you know, if I'm sitting in an interfaith panel, it's like I'm Muslim, and often people will speak like, well, in your tradition, you know, talk to me about your idea of the divine human relationship, and I'll talk about my idea. And fundamentally, I don't experience things that way. I chose to go to a Quaker school in kindergarten. My mother took me to all the schools and said, which school do you want to go to? I chose a Quaker school. I was deeply influenced by Quaker meditation as a child and principles. And I later chose to go to Bryn Mawr and studied at Haverford, which are Quaker colleges. I grew up singing, and there were not opportunities to sing classical Indian music or Muslim sacred music. I was trained in art song and operetta and the whole sacred Western canon. So I grew up singing in many, well, Episcopalian churches. I grew up singing, I mean, I've sung every year through my adolescence, you know, the Handel's oratorios and Bach motets and Jesu meine Freude. These, so all of this music is fundamental to who I am. And it opened a kind of cavern in me. I feel like a cathedral opened inside of me through singing all of this Christian sacred music. And the Quran resonates within that cathedral. You know, I started reciting Quran later in grade 8, like as an art form. But I was singing Western sacred music all through my childhood. And my parents were deeply, deeply involved with African Americans communities, Muslims and non-Muslim. And so African American music, spirituality, culture, the collection, the relationship, for example, to the Moses story, which is such a deep part of like African American liberation and anti-racism narratives from the times of slavery, have influenced my reading of the Quranic Moses narrative. So how do I separate all this? With parents who were intellectuals, I was surrounded by kind of East Coast Jewish intelligentsia, you know, artists and poets and scholars who were Jewish. And those traditions are so familiar to me, you know, and so this is all a part of who I am. And when I teach as a Sufi also, I'm a Sufi who, there are people who come to my, we use like Sufi traditions and mantras and ceremonies, but the people who come, some of them are Muslim, some of them are para-Muslim, sub-Muslim, some of them are Christian or Jewish or unnamed, and none of this matters. And none of this matters because actually, you know, the polar ice caps are melting. The planet is burning. Humanity is, you know, this rise of just acquisition is destroying not just life, but actually the basis of life, the foundation of life. And so what matters is for us to bring everything that we all are together, not just me as Muslim and you and Christian, as you as Jew, as you as Buddhist, but now we're in a global world, and we are all permeated by all of this, and all our narratives need to converge in order to provide like the inspiration for the work that we need to be doing together out.
Rory started when he talked about the poem, and so long as there is one criminal incarcerated, so long as there is one person, so that is me. And I find our activism happens not in the rebellious way. I was brought up Sunni, Muslim, very strict. And my father asked me if I have prayed one of the 5 prayers. And at age 6, I told him, none of your business. It's between me and God. And I since then, I've been on the journey that Rory spoke of when we first started. So long as there is one suffering, I am suffering. If I am able to eat, my responsibility to make sure others are able to eat. So long as I have the concept of understanding my own suffering, I have to relate to other people's suffering. So that's my activism. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump in with that. Thank you for bringing that in. It just, it makes me think of, so that was a quote from Howard Thurman that I read at the beginning. And he's, for those who don't know, an amazing African-American sage who was a mentor to many in the civil rights movement, including Martin Luther King Jr. His work is really wonderful. And I keep thinking again about, we talked a little bit in the last session about love and about what that means, and also about listening to others in voices that haven't been heard. And it brings to mind another wisdom from Thurman, who used to say that love, in the end, we love people in the details of their lives. So there is a kind of love for everyone, but when we're really loving someone is when we get to know them and we're really listening. And we're at such a time right now where people have not been heard and have said they've been loved and supported by many people, and their lives are being torn apart in broad daylight with impunity. On top of the unconscious bias and racism they just have to experience on a day-to-day basis. So I don't have answers for that, but I do feel like it needs to be brought in. There's something to listening and to empathy that does break down power dynamics in a very real sense when it's done with a real person, one-on-one, and you're listening. Then something does begin to change and you actually begin to get insight into perspectives that you wouldn't normally have because you haven't had to go through the same stuff. So I just think that is so important for where we're at right now. And, you know, if InterSpirituality is to have a future where we actually are all together, it also means that we're together among radical difference, and that's going to happen for a long time. And we need to figure out how to be in right relationship with that, and with ourselves and with others, and not necessarily have the answers for how to fix it, I think.
I just want to interject for a moment and say we just have another minute or minute and a half for any presenters who want to share before we move to questions.
Let me just share one word. I was asked about the concept of divine hospitality, and I got this concept from a Lebanese Christian and a Lebanese Muslim writing this beautiful book together on divine hospitality that I can deeply recommend. And the whole idea is to invite the religious other into your tradition, just as we heard from Seemi Ghazi, being inspired or at least finding a truth or whatever in a Christian spiritual song tradition, as I could, as a Christian, participate in a Muslim meditation. That's about divine hospitality, to be open to the other, but also to be curious to participate in the other one's traditions. I just finished a master degree last week on conflict mediation, and I did my master thesis on interfaith dialogue as a principle of conflict mediation. And who I found very interesting was a Jewish philosopher, Martin Buber. I guess you know him. If you don't know Martin Buber, I can deeply recommend his book, I and You, from 1923. And he was really a pioneer on interfaith dialogue. He insisted to see the person of the other faith tradition or whatever. So if you have a time, please read the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would any presenter, sorry, did someone speak? If any presenter would like to just add a few more words, and otherwise we could have some questions. Is that Abuela? Yeah, please go ahead and unmute yourself. And yeah.
Bueno, yo quiero decir que el Cristóbal Colón, que vino a América, describe, me refiero a la hospitalidad, que había llegado a tierras donde había demasiado.
Where it was so beautiful. It was too beautiful. In generosity, he was speaking about Mother Earth and humans. There was hospitality, and there was no fear of death. And that refers to America. In that time, just about 500 years ago. And so thank you for the times that come and go. But all religions are equally marvelous because it's to recognize how we recognize each other. That word God is it's energy with different colors. But the most beautiful thing is that it's not outside of us, it's inside. It comes from us. And so I like to see my body as a temple of God, as all of your bodies. I love you all very much. I thank you all for being brave. That braveness to be leaders. I love you all. Thank you, thank you.
Does anyone have a question? We just have a moment together more. But perhaps if someone has a short question, they could ask that.
Rory, my short question is, just in case you happen to have any secret about how to move into this place of engagement. I'm not at all proud of the fact that I'm 71 years old, and it was only a year ago that my son and his wife adopted 2 Black children. And it is a result of the adoption of Micah and Emma, who are 9 and 11, that my racism has been shown to me and has been transforming me. I know all the doctrine. I knew all the doctrine. How can we move in a way that you don't have to have an adopted Black grandson or granddaughter to see the face of God in all? Easy question, right?
Yeah, and I know they're gonna thank you so much for that. They're gonna kick us out of the room too. We'll go back to the other one. So I don't know how long it'll take, but
Rory, just sorry to we're actually in the main room, and so everyone has just come back and reconvened. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Love and listening, Linda. Love and listening is what Rory said earlier. Love and listening. Examine inside of ourselves. Go to love and listening. And
speaking of that, that's what we're going to do right now.
We're going to move into small groups for our last few minutes. So let's go into love and listening to each other.
So Garrett, let's put you in small groups.
Here we go. We're
total random. Here we go. We
go meet your friends.
6 minutes.
Share the time. Share the time.
All right, off we go.
Bye.